Hello, everyone. This is Fadi, and I'd like to welcome you back again to a continuation of this fabulous series about Islam and atheism. And so far, we have given enough backgrounds about the issue of, why Muslims are, or especially young Muslims, are considering to leave Islam and even declare themselves to be atheist. And with me here in studio, our dear brother, Dr. David Wood, who gave excellent quotations from some of the leading atheists to show that there is some contradiction taking place here in terms of what is being said and what is the purpose of life, and how did we get here, and so many other things, and especially new atheist movement. Today we are going to take another look at atheism and its relationship with Islam from a different angle. It's going to be dealing now with God, atheism, and morality. And as you know, Islam obviously emphasizes morality in its own way, of course, and many of these Muslims who declared themselves to be atheists came from that background, understand that there is a set of rules that they have to go by, and oftentimes, David, that Muslims do this, gravitate away from Islam because of the laws and the Sharia and many of these requirements. So I'd like to welcome you, of course, and I want to turn this over to you to elaborate a little bit further on the relationship between morality, atheism, and God.
Yeah, so as you know, there was a study several years ago among young people in Iraq, and this was before ISIS, but they found that many young people were just turning away from religion completely. They despised religion, the young people, and it was because they'd grown up in an environment where they see all of the violence and the hypocrisy and so on. They're just like, if that's what religion is, I don't want any part of it, right? And of course, in recent years, people looking at ISIS and saying, if this is what Islam teaches to go around killing and slaughtering and enslaving women and things like that, I want no part of it. So lots of people leave Islam on that basis. What I find interesting is that when people are leaving Islam, whether it's because of the violence or because of all the things Muhammad did or because of Islam's impact on women, they're saying that Islam is just so contrary to our moral views that it just can't possibly be true. Now, what the interesting part is that many of these people then go on to become atheists, and that's what we're going to focus on, because as far as I can tell, there's no real foundation for morality in atheism. And I'm not just saying that as myself, as a philosopher, as a former atheist, or anything else. Atheists who study these things will acknowledge this. And so, in earlier videos, we talked about veganism. That if you're a vegan, you still have food options available, just not the same options that everyone else has available. And we thought about that in reference to meaning. You could still have meaning in life as an atheist, but the kinds of meaning that are available to you are far fewer than would be available to a theist who believes in a God who creates the universe and so on. But you have a similar issue when it comes to morality, that you can still believe certain things are right and wrong and so on, but the kinds of things you can mean by that are much narrower in scope than what a theist could possibly mean by these things. And so the problem that we're going to be raising over and over again in this series is you have people leaving Islam because they regard the violence as wrong and immoral. They regard Muhammad's treatment of women as wrong and immoral.
Right.
They regard these things as wrong and immoral, and then they say, aha, because of all these wrong and immoral things, we're going to go to an ideology, atheism, which has no basis for saying what is wrong and immoral. And that makes no sense, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it makes no sense. It's not like you go there and then you say, think about what would happen, right? If you took that, if you seriously followed atheism through to its implications, you'd have to look at all the horrible things Muhammad did and then say, that can't be true. Now I'm going to atheism. Now I have no basis for saying what right and wrong even is, so I have to abandon all of my arguments against Muhammad. And what do you do then? Do you convert back because you dropped your objections? So here's the situation. We can break this down. Because here's the thing: your average atheist, he still believes things are right and wrong. He still
Correct.
is able to spot them. So I want to be clear here when we're talking about atheism not having a foundation for good and bad, right and wrong. We're not saying that atheists have no foundation for good and bad, right and wrong. Atheists have a foundation for good and bad, right and wrong because they're created in the image of God, right? It's
Amen.
built into them. They know it because of what they really are. But according to their ideology, they have no foundation for it, right? Their ideology says there's no foundation. So they're living these kinds of double lives. And so I want to be clear here because for some reason, atheists, even very intelligent atheists, always misinterpret this. When we say that there's no foundation for morality in atheism, they're saying, oh, you're saying that all atheists are immoral. No, atheists can do very good things. The point is, according to your ideology, what's the difference between doing something good and doing something bad? Is it just your feelings? Is that the only difference? Or is something really right and really wrong? So let's go ahead and take a look at two quotations by Richard Dawkins. One we saw earlier, and another one we'll talk about basically the morality in the universe. But here we have a quotation we already looked at. We are machines built by DNA, whose purpose is to make more copies of the same DNA. This is exactly what we are for. We are machines for propagating DNA, and the propagation of DNA is a self-sustaining process. It is every living object's sole reason for living. Now, if you take that seriously, that we're just machines for propagating DNA, a lot of our views about right and wrong they have to go out the window, right? Because most fundamentally, when we're talking about how we should treat other human beings, it's because we view other human beings in a certain way, right? No one would be opposed to, again, if I have a machine for turning bread into toast, no one would have a problem with me smashing my toaster to bits, even though it's a machine with a purpose.
That's right.
So what's the difference between that and a human being? Well, we want to treat, you could say, well, human beings are alive. Well, right, but we still want to treat human beings different from trees, different from cats, different from dogs. Why are human beings so different? Well, according to theism, we have a special place. We're created in the image of God. We're separate from everything else. According to atheism, how are we really different? We have certain abilities, but other creatures have other abilities, right? So what business do we have saying, well, we're smarter than other creatures, therefore we have to be treated in a certain way that we don't apply to anything else? A baboon has a more colorful butt than other creatures. Why not treat that as the main criterion for what the best creature is? Or a cheetah's faster than we are. So what are we doing here? Picking our, the ability where we excel, and then saying that's why we should be treated so radically differently. So anyway, the point here is part of our concern for human rights and not mistreating other people is that we view ourselves as in a completely different class where we have intrinsic human rights that must not be violated, not by governments, not by anyone else. Mm-hmm. What sense does that make if we really take it seriously that we're just machines for propagating DNA, like other machines for propagating DNA? I mean,
Exactly.
a cow is a machine for propagating DNA.
I mean, all animals, basically.
Yeah, but think about that, right? We kill and eat a cow. It's a machine for propagating DNA. Why can't you kill and eat a human being? Most human beings would say, no, you don't do that. Well, why? It doesn't make any sense on atheism. And it's interesting, there are atheist ethicists who actually argue that, right? Who actually, they follow the view through.
Atheists and ethicists are the same thing.
Yeah, they follow the view through to its logical conclusion and say, yeah, if someone dies and you don't want to waste them, why not eat them, right? And so there are people who will say things like that. But the idea is we're very, very, the sort of creature we are given atheism is very different from the sort of creature we are given theism. All right, let's go ahead and check that the next Richard Dawkins quote. And Dawkins is going to tell us a little bit more. He says, in a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Notice, there is, according to Richard Dawkins, in this universe, at bottom, there's no good and no evil. Right? These things do not exist outside of our own minds. In our own minds, we have a concept of good and evil, but at the end of the day, these are just really how we feel about these things, right? There's nothing out there. There's no standard that makes these things good or bad. So here's really the problem for atheists, and here we're talking about ex-Muslim atheists, Muslims who are rejecting Islam because they find something morally repugnant in it. And then they become atheists where they have no foundation for that moral revulsion that they feel. Basically, on atheism, there's only a couple places you can get your moral values from. There's only a couple places you get your moral values or anything you would regard as a moral obligation from, because anything supernatural is off the table. You're not getting this from God.
So it's better feelings, maybe?
Yeah. So I mean, sort of historically, like where did your feelings come from? That's a problem with atheists. It always comes down to feelings with them. The question is, how did you arrive at those feelings? And so you got two basic places you can go. One, you can say human beings are kind of wired in this way, right? Our brains are wired to want to help other people or something like that, and so we kind of derive a moral system from that. So this is called a herd instinct, right? Namely that as humans are evolving, ones that have a herd instinct where they just naturally by nature are wired to help out other members of their species will do better as a group than individuals who don't try to help each other, right? Because those will always be like loners and they'll never help each other and they won't be helped, and then they'll die off. So the ones that are actually better fit to survive are ones that have a sense of cooperation.
Right.
And so you can say it's wired into you. But notice, something being wired into you that way doesn't make it good or bad, right? It doesn't make it good or bad. It's just this is what helps you reproduce. So for example, a male lion who moves into another pride of lions will kill off all the lion cubs that were already there.
That's right.
To make room for its own offspring. Now, it's wired to do that, and it helps that lion produce its own offspring because now there's less competition. It killed off all the young that were already there to make room for its own. You don't say that's good because it's wired to do that, right?
That's right.
There are organisms that reproduce by the animal version of rape, right? They just go in and take what they want, and that's how they reproduce. They're wired to do that. You don't say, well, therefore it's good that they do that. So anyway, the point here is, if you're saying that morality, your moral views are just part of a herd instinct because you're wired to do that, that doesn't make those things right or wrong. It's just you're wired to do these things. So if you're saying that our sense of our moral views, our claims against Muhammad, are just things that are wired into us, it's not telling you anything about right or wrong. It's got nothing to do with that. It's just that's how those are things you're programmed to do, and those are things that maybe helped your ancestors. It has nothing to do with whether they're right or wrong. You could be programmed to do things that are horrible. I mean, there are people who are just far more violent than others. They're wired to be that way. They're that way when they're young. They're that way when they're old. They're just more violent than other people. You don't say, well, you're wired to do that, so that therefore it's good. This is a different category. So that's one direction they can go. They can go, in the direction of saying we're wired. That doesn't give them anything like objective moral values and standards and things like that. The other direction they can go is to society. We're taught certain things are right and wrong in our society. Problem here is societies completely contradict each other. You can go to Pakistan, and if a girl walks down the street without a male escort, her own brother will kill her. Her own brother will, and sometimes her father and brother, her whole family will gather together and kill her for dishonoring her family. And some of them, they're so unashamed of that, they'll walk right down to the police station and say, yep, we had to kill her. We had to kill her. She walked down the street without a male escort. Now, we would look at that and be completely horrified. Mm-hmm. We believe that's wrong. But guess what? If it's just society that decides what's right and wrong and tells you, who's to judge the societies, right?
That's right.
So you can't say that's right because a society taught its people to do that. Otherwise, you end up with hopeless contradictions. some of the most horrible things ever. Communist China, communist Soviet Union, people being killed left and right, people being oppressed, the Nazis, some of the most horrible atrocities ever. They're doing what their society teaches. We don't want to say, well, because the society teaches it, that makes it right. So the only places that atheists really have to go to determine, to provide a foundation for what's right and what's wrong, provide no such foundation. If I say, why is this behavior right? And you say, well, I'm wired to do that. And if I'd been wired differently, then something else would have been right. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong. You're just telling me how you're wired and what helped your species, and you could look at other species and they're completely different. So that doesn't give you any real basis for saying what's right and wrong. Alternatively, if you say, well, society taught me that this is right and wrong. Well, if you've been born in a different society, it might teach you something completely different is right and wrong.
That will contradict the other society.
Yeah, so none of this provides any sort of foundation. And yet, atheists want to believe that when they're condemning Muhammad, they're actually condemning him for doing something wrong, for violating moral standards that he should not have violated. Right. And so if those sorts of things are not available given your worldview, then you're still condemning Muhammad, but it's not based on your worldview. If it was your worldview, if you were really a serious atheist who acknowledged the implications of his worldview, you would have to say, I don't like what Muhammad did. I'm not going to believe in him. I don't like what he did, and I'm not going to follow him, but I can't really say he did anything wrong because there's no real basis for it, but I'm not going to believe in him. That's what you'd have to say. That's not what they say, though. They want to say he did all of these things wrong, and here in the very near future, we're going to look through some of those things and see why atheists have a problem. But here's what they should be thinking. They should be thinking, wait a minute, if I know that these things are wrong and that Muhammad has violated a moral standard, he's gotten these things wrong, he's done things that are completely immoral, then I need a worldview that makes sense of my moral beliefs, and that's just not atheism.
Exactly, and of course there's so many things we can talk about. You mentioned already the character of Muhammad. You mentioned violence, for instance, in Islam. You ask a fundamentalist Muslim, I'll tell you violence is perfectly acceptable. God told me to behave this way against certain people. The treatment of women in Islam, that's another way you can look at it. I mean, find me a single person, aside from being a Muslim, if I were to share just without mentioning that Muhammad says or the Quran says, would you like a woman to be treated this way, or to be beaten up by her husband, or to be honored or killed, or whatever? Naturally, the reaction would be, of course not, without knowing that this is what the moral code for Islam is all about, for instance. So there is this sense of contradiction that you mentioned, of course. And obviously, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that in the the upcoming episodes, we are going to deal with many examples from Muhammad's own life. Anything else you would like to add to this, brother?
Nope, that's good for now. And I think next we'll be dealing with why the moral beliefs that even the atheists have actually are evidence for God's existence, and certainly aren't evidence for atheism.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Until we meet again in the next episode, have a blessed day. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. We can't make these quality videos without the help of partners like you. So please consider becoming a Patreon supporter today at patreon.com/Sira International. I want to make sure you always get notified when we release a new video. So please click the bell to be notified, and of course, make sure to subscribe to this channel. If this video was helpful to you, please click the thumbs up. Thank you.